And we are back. We're back. We're back. We got the final speaker of the day of the conference. First of all, just want to thank everybody for tuning in, for joining, for your questions, for your chat. So we definitely want to bring a lot of energy and stuff as we round out here. So I want to welcome in Peter Pezaris. Peter, how you doing, my friend?
Doing great. Thanks very much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Currently, Pierre is the founder and CEO of CodeStream. We're going to get to that in a second. But we're going to start from the top. Peter, where are you from?
Well, I grew up in the Boston area, and I now live in San Francisco, but I'm currently in my summer home in Florida.
Oh, nice. What part of Florida?
Delray Beach. It's near Boca Raton. It's kind of near the southeast coastline.
Yep, I stayed in Naples for a couple of years. Went to college down there. So yeah, I know where you're at. So Peter, you say you grew up in Boston. Is it high school, college?
Yeah,
in Boston.
Yeah, I grew up in a little town just outside of Boston called Winchester. It's about 10 minutes outside the city, tiny little town, and ended up going to school at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and then after that, worked on Wall Street for a little while in New York City, and then moved from there around a few different places before ending up in San Francisco.
Okay, so we'll start there. You're working at Wall Street. What are you doing at Wall Street?
Well, I was a developer, so I went to Carnegie Mellon University to study computer science and mathematics. And so my first jobs out of college were programming. And I was working for a company called Applix, where just prior to Wall Street, where they were building basically a Microsoft Office competitor, but for Linux or Unix. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get a job as a programmer, but I got a job as a quality assurance engineer, which was close enough maybe. And I worked very, very hard, long hours, well into the night, almost every night. And after my first year there, so I didn't get the salary that I wanted because I was but I was a QA engineer and not a software engineer, because software engineers were paid more at the time. Mm-hmm. So at the end of a year of working very hard, my manager said, well, we're going to really bump up your salary. We're going to give you a 40% raise. And I was pretty excited about that. But then his manager said, well, we can only give maximum 10% raises in the company this year. And so I was kind of kicking myself for having worked so hard for hardly any reward for an entire year. And that's when a friend of mine called up and said, why don't you come work on Wall Street? And my salary went from, I think, around $22,000 to $45,000. And 2 years later, I was making $150,000. So that was definitely the right move at that time in my career.
So you're making $22,000, and I don't want to date you, Peter.
Yeah, I'm pretty old. This is in the early 90s. So
okay, so it's I mean, it's not equal, but it's also not a lot of money and stuff now. And so you're working at Wall Street. Talk about, from an engineer, what type of problems are you solving working at Wall Street? And then also during that time, what does the tech stack look like?
Well, we were working on Unix systems and building X11 applications. And that's X11 was a windowing system for Unix. I'm not sure it's being used that much anymore. And we were working for the corporate desk trading system. And so this was supporting software that was used internally for the corporate desk traders to enter their transactions as they perform their trades. And the desk at the time was doing about $1 trillion worth of transactional volume every year. So it was quite an important part of the firm. So that gave us a little bit of pride, knowing that we were working on a system that was used that much to process that larger volume of transactions. And it was a lot of fun, because not only was you felt like you had a direct impact, but there were also a number of pretty big challenges along the way. I remember one Friday morning in particular, we had a problem with the system. The system crashed, and it was on a weekend where They called it Managing Directors Weekend. So all the managing directors, which were the important people at the firm, they wanted to leave to go away for a weekend retreat. And they wanted to get all their trades in on Friday morning so they could go do that. So you can imagine when the system crashed, there's a lot of really unhappy, very powerful people at the trading firm. And my teammate, his name was also Peter. He was trying to debug the problem and diagnose it. And the pressure got to be so great on him that he seized up and he just couldn't do anything. Like he literally had a panic attack. And so my manager asked me whether I could help to try to fix it. And at the time, I was a pretty new hire. I'd only been working there about 9 months. And I sat at the desk. I thought I found the problem. So I made a new build. And this isn't going to mean much to a lot of people, but I had to FTP a binary directly into production and have it start just running with no debugging. There was no CI/CD. There was no test harness. There was nothing. It was just like, I hope this is the fix, and fire into production, and with tremendous amount of pressure. And thankfully it worked. And that got the MDs all to be able to execute their trades. But I guess the interesting part, at least for me, of the story was that I realized that during those high pressure situations, I kind of enjoyed it. I kind of enjoyed solving those big problems when there's a lot on the line. And I think that's a quality that served me well over the years that I've been an entrepreneur, because there's so many circumstances when things aren't going right when you're building businesses. And it's important to stay focused on those things that can help you find solutions to those problems.
You just talked about a lot being online. You're at Wall Street. You say you're making $150,000. Soon enough, you leave. You make a transition.
Yeah. Right.
Number one, why?
Yeah.
And what did that transition look like?
So one night over beers, 3 of my friends and I were playing pool, and we decided that we wanted to start a company. So these were 3 friends that I had met in college. They were all part of the Carnegie Mellon computer science program. So we'd all independently gravitated to different Wall Street firms. And we decided we wanted to do something else. We wanted to start our own thing, because as good as the job was, it paid well. I always had ambitions of being my own boss. So we didn't know exactly what we were going to do. And we've started a couple of projects on a nights and weekends basis, none of which really took off. So for the better part of a year, we sort of iterated on some ideas. But then about a year into that process, we happened upon the idea of taking fantasy sports, which was an existing activity, but it entirely existed offline. And we wanted to create a website in order to allow people to more easily run their fantasy leagues. And it struck us as being such a good idea that we really poured our heart and souls into it at the very beginning, and worked tirelessly for months and months and months with very, very little sleep, trying to balance working full-time during the day and then full-time plus at night. And eventually that business took off to the point where it looked like it could actually generate some revenue. But I couldn't survive in both modes. I ended up being so fantastically tired, exhausted. And actually a funny anecdote was that I called up, while I still had a full-time job, I called up my business partner, Mike, and I said, Mike, how do you do it? How do you stay awake during the day? I'm so wrecked. I can't keep my eyes open. And he says, I'll tell you what I do. I take a break and go to the bathroom and I take a nap. And I was like, that's brilliant, right? So I hung up the phone with Mike. I go into the bathroom and I'm there sitting on the toilet. And right there at the perfect height is the toilet paper dispenser. So there goes my forehead onto the toilet paper dispenser. And I fall asleep for 20 minutes, 20 blissful minutes. And I felt so refreshed. But then when I got up, I went to the sink to wash my hands, and there, imprinted into my forehead, it said, if roll is empty, slide cover to right. So I start going like this, and I try to get that imprint off my forehead. And it was at that moment that I kind of realized that maybe I can't do this forever. And we worked it out so that I could quit my job and the company would pay me $10,000 a year. So I was living in Manhattan, and $10,000 a year isn't a lot of money. So I couldn't afford an apartment. So Mike and I pooled our resources and we both gave up our apartments and we got a shitty little loft in Manhattan where we slept on the floor, and that was our office. But the place had no heat and no hot water. So that it tends to get cold sometimes in New York. So the only thing that would give off heat was our giant, back then the computers they would make were really large desktop things. And so at night when we did sleep, which wasn't more than 1 or 2 hours a night, I used to curl up next to my computer because it's the only thing in the whole place that gave off any heat. So that was our early sort of entree into being entrepreneurs. And everybody thought I was crazy because the internet wasn't a thing yet. Nobody knew that you could make money with it. My mom thought I was absolutely insane to have quit a job where I was being paid well and also ascending in terms of promotions and things. And I quit that job to, sleep on the floor with no furniture and no heat and no hot water. But it ended up okay. 3 years later, we had a really great exit with that company. And that was the start of now a 25-year history of not only being an entrepreneur, but I've had the really good fortune of being able to work with those same guys. So the four of us have stuck together for all those years. And I've now built four companies together.
You said something really interesting there, Peter. You said that, a lot of people were thinking that you were crazy because you would leave this high paying job and go work in your startup, yep. Similar to Kyle, that we just had two speakers ago. The clear distinction, which sounds more insane, that you just said that essentially a lot of people thought the internet itself was a fad.
Yep.
They thought it was going to pass in time. So it's one distinction to make the decision where, there's tons of social media around. There's tons of, YouTube and all that. Like the internet itself is oxygen in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But what gave you the indication that A, this is not a fad, the internet itself, and B, that this company and stuff can really kind of like go along this process?
Well, it was, I guess, the first time I ever saw the internet was, or the World Wide Web, I should say, because, the internet was a thing well before then. You could email people, for example. But the first time I saw the World Wide Web, it really struck me as something fundamentally different. And originally it was for scientists and researchers and geeks primarily. But we believed that it was going to be transformative. Much in the same way that Gutenberg changed the world with his printing press, we were convinced from the very beginning that the World Wide Web was going to change the way that humanity communicated. And in fact, when we started that company and started just building projects, the name of our company was Daedalus Worldwide. Daedalus because we sort of liked that name, but worldwide because we loved the name International Business Machines, like some really big sounding name that, was going to take over the world, IBM, right? So we wanted a name like that, but we also wanted to acknowledge that it was the World Wide Web that was going to take us there. And it was surreal. This was a long time ago. So back in the mid-90s now, the first time I remember I saw a bus go by that had a URL printed on the side that had like something, I forget the brand, but it was something.com. And I was like, oh my God, it's actually happening. This internet thing is going to be big. And it was quite a ride through the Web 1.0 bubble.
It's really interesting because we live in an era right now where we're trying to figure out, is AI really going to get to the levels that we think it's going to get to? Is blockchain really going to get to the levels that we think it's going to get to? And, you live through an era where that same mindset was the internet, the stuff, and, World Wide Web and stuff going to get to the levels and stuff that it was going to get to. So that's really interesting. So, you and your friends, you're at this company. You sell the company.
Yep.
How long you sell the company? How long from selling the company to starting the next one? What was the time period look like?
The same night. Well, no, sorry. almost.
Time out.
So, yeah.
Hold on. So you hold on.
Yeah, I don't take
So,
time off.
right. So you sell the company. Let's essentially say, you get the check, and and
Yeah.
you're like, this is awesome. So guys, you guys ready to?
No, okay. There is an in between period there. But
Okay.
actually, the story of selling the company is kind of remarkable in that from the time we decided to do fantasy sports online, it was less than 3 years from that point in time until we sold it. But during those 3-year period, even until the very end, I wasn't sure we had how to value what we had done and whether we were going to be successful, whether we weren't, whether we were going to be profitable. We worked hard at it for 3 years. I probably slept, without exaggeration, for 3 years, I slept about 3 hours a night, which is a really, really hard thing to do. I worked over 100 hours a week. No vacations. I poured my heart and soul, everything I had. And yet it was all on the hope that someday it would be valuable, because we weren't MBAs. I had no idea how to raise money. We didn't raise money because we had no ability to. And the only dollar we spent was a dollar that we earned in revenue. And so for much of that time, I was living on 99-cent Whoppers and giant bowls of pasta because that's all we could afford. Eventually, we did get heat and hot water in that apartment, but not for a while. And so one day, 3 years into it, one of our partners, CBS, came and asked to take us out to dinner, to lunch, actually. And they said, we want to buy your company. And I said, okay, great. And I had no idea what to expect. And they said, well, we want to buy it for $16 million. And my jaw hit the floor because I had no idea that the work we had put in was going to translate into something that was valuable like that. And so we took it to a law firm and had them look at the deal, look at the offer. And less than a month later, we sold it for 46. And I remember looking at my bank account the next day, I had like $7, in my bank. I go to the ATM and I can't even withdraw anything because, the lowest bill it spits out is a 20. And now all of a sudden there's all these euros. And I'm like, wow, because we didn't take any outside money. So we just split that between us. And I realized at that moment that I was going to be an entrepreneur forever, because the sense of accomplishment that we had been through such hell together, and we were able to realize such a great outcome. It was unbelievable. And so the irony is that looking back on it, we actually sold it for cheap. The business itself was worth much more than we sold it for. It ended up being almost $1 billion business for CBS at the peak of its valuation. So we should have held out, but it's okay. I'm not like I don't want to look poorly back on that history.
So you have a company. You say you get a $16 million offer. You end up selling it for 46.
Yeah.
So what? I know you said you didn't have any indication of stuff like what it was worth or anything. What changed? Like, was it the law firm say, okay, this is worth a lot more? Did you guys counter offer? What happened there?
Well, the 16 million is just sort of an initial offer, and we didn't know anything about how to value the business. And so we hired a law firm and also an investment banker. And although the investment banker didn't add any value at all, they were horrible. They were value destroying. At the very least, they opened us our eyes up to how to think about valuing a company, because we had no idea how to do it. And I'm sure there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that don't know how to do a discounted cash flow analysis or a revenue multiple or any of the other ways, or looking at comparable companies. So these were all new concepts to us. And once we started learning and digging in, we realized that maybe we did have something that was more valuable than we thought. So we collectively, internally, decided that we had a hard number. We weren't going to sell for less than 30 million. And so we negotiated with CBS and we hit a stalling point. And we told the investment bank that we're not going to sell for less than 30. And and they didn't know that. CBS didn't know that. But the maximum offer they would come up to is 28. And so the deal died because they weren't able to meet our requirement. And we the investment bank left the meeting that we had set up, and we thought that the deal was going to be, gone. And then as a last minute ditch, once the investment bankers left the room, one of the executives of the acquiring company pulled me and my partner aside and said, listen, now that these jerks are out of the room, let's see if we can find a solution to the problem. So we came up with an earnout that was very achievable, and we all knew that we were going to hit those numbers. And between the earnout, which was additive, plus a slight movement in the stock price from the time they made the offer to the time we closed, ended up with a big jump in valuation. Now, I wish I could say that was all cash and it all went directly to our pockets, because we did receive a good chunk of stock, and we watched that stock die when the Web 1.0 bubble burst. But so we all did pretty well. I can't complain.
Okay, so you find yourself at Carnegie Mellon. You go from working at Wall Street. You're making six figures, which I would say a lot of people would argue that that's the goal in life. That's the dream. You decided you wanted more. You end up selling this company for $46 million. And then from there, one could argue again, some people may retire. Some people may retire. Like, I'm just going to find a beach, go spend time with the family, the kids. And again, so is it fair to say that almost became addicting? That hustle that built up to the big prize?
It was addicting, and like the concept, like for me, I'm a builder by nature. My job is that I'm a CEO, an entrepreneur who builds businesses, and my hobby is that I'm a woodworker, because I like to build furniture and toys and other things. So I think that's just part of my DNA to build things, and I enjoy it. So when we sold the company, I'm not the type of person that would enjoy just sitting on a beach for years and years and years, sipping cocktails and not doing much else. So when we sold the first business, to me, that was the beginning of my career, not the end of it. And we stayed on board as part of the acquired company, and we ended up actually running all of CBS's online properties. And so I, at a pretty young age, had the opportunity to build the first versions of NFL.com, Major League Baseball.com, and the fantasy sports products for many, many online products, properties that were gaining popularity in the early days of the web. So it was a great experience. I was a Section 16 officer of a publicly traded company. And so that taught me it opened my eyes to a lot of new challenges as a young executive. And that was one of my primary concerns, is that would people take me seriously as somebody in their 20s, essentially running a public company? And that was a fantastic experience. So after a couple of years of doing that, post-acquisition, that's why I say, there's a little bit more to the story, because after CBS Sports bought our company, we stayed on board for a little over 2 years. And then once the bubble really hit and media companies were withdrawing their investment from the web, that's when we decided as a team to leave and start our next company. So when you say, like, how long did it take before you started the next company? Well, the day we left, that night, I had a meeting at my house with 14 of my business partners. The team had grown, and or at least my close circle of team had grown. And that night we decided to start our next business.
So here's something interesting. You get acquired essentially from CBS. You have all these zeros and stuff in your bank account, and then you go back to being an employee. What is the principles that keep you in line to work hard? Because one could argue that will become challenging. A lot of people build their own business to remain their own boss. And At one point, you're back to being an employee. So talk about that transition a little bit, from going from a boss back to an employee. Now you have all these zeros in your account, which you could argue it's even tougher now.
Yeah.
So how you stay in line with that?
I think at the time, the internet was still the Wild West. And so it was a completely new set of challenges and experiences. And it was just so much fun to explore what was possible. So it really, really didn't feel like being an employee, and certainly not an employee at a large company, because the internet divisions of even large companies were largely run autonomously. And that was definitely the case for us. So I really didn't have to deal with too much in the way of corporate politics, which made it bearable and made it enjoyable. That hasn't always been the case. Like, I've sold 3 companies, and each transaction has been a little bit different. And I guess they've gotten a little bit progressively worse from a political perspective, but that's part of the price. It's not a price. It's part of the deal. A lot of companies, when they're sold, the acquiring company wants to keep the executive team on board, and you have to view that as part of the transaction and accept it. And that's always the case.
You just mentioned that it's a part of the deal. You just said that essentially, kind of like when the burst happened with the internet, that your 4 friends decided to stay together. Question: in early life, was that the deal? Was that the deal for all y'all always to stay together, no matter what?
I don't know that we ever made a blood pact or anything like that, but it was I think that every time we've come to a new natural breaking point, like, for example, selling the company or another option, we just sort of look around the room at each other and say, well, should we do this again? And the answer has always been yes so far. I'm not sure for how much longer. We've been doing it for a long time. 25 years together as partners is a really long time, but I have such gratitude, and I feel so fortunate to be able to not only have this lifestyle and enjoy the work that I do, but also to do it with my best friends. I couldn't ask for anything more.
So you leave CBS, and now you guys decided to start a new company. Tell us about that company and what it did.
The company was called Multiply, and it was an early player in social media. When we launched in 2003, we had a product that was very similar to what Facebook is today. Now, at the time, there didn't exist anything like that, because although Facebook did exist in that time period, Facebook at that time was basically just connected profiles, sort of 6 degrees of separation. And the only thing you could do is view one person's profile at a time and write on their wall if you want. It was more like MySpace. And so you each had your own page. So we knew about Friendster and MySpace, and our twist on those products was that we thought that the killer application for the web always has been and always will be communication. So if we could figure out some way to have a group-based conversation dynamic among your closest friends and family, that would be a powerful concept. And so the very first version of Multiply had something called a newsfeed. And Facebook didn't add theirs until about 2 years later, and Twitter hadn't come along yet. So we really were pioneers from that perspective. And that gave us, I would say, a product competitive advantage, but it wasn't enough for us to ultimately win the social networking competitive landscape. Ultimately, of course, Facebook was the primary market leader. We did enjoy great growth, a great trajectory over the course of 7 years of running that business. We grew to about 20 million registered users. But ultimately, we found success by doing a soft pivot from social media to social commerce. Because even though it was against the terms of service of our website, our customers were using their profile pages to buy and sell goods. They would sort of like Etsy or Craigslist. And we ended up becoming so popular in certain regions of the world that we were the #1 buying and selling program, especially in Southeast Asia, which was no intentional. We didn't say, hey, let's go set out to build a Southeast Asian e-commerce platform. And yet that's where we ended up. So we sold that company in 2010, and it was another great exit. We had raised a bunch of money with that business because we learned a little bit more about how venture capital works. And we were able to get that deal done, although it wasn't easy. It was at a time right after, in 2008, when we had the financial collapse. There wasn't a lot of venture activity and there weren't a lot of transactions happening. So also at that time, it became clear that Facebook was going to be the dominant social networking platform in the world. So for us to successfully pivot into social commerce was kind of a Hail Mary type long shot. And so we all feel very fortunate that it ended up working out.
So you iterate essentially, and you're going to build this social shopping platform. You exit. At this point in your mind, this is your second exit with a group of friends. At this point in your mind, what's going through your head? You know, are you feeling that this is two home runs? I'm Barry Bonds, Babe Ruth. Like we're unstoppable here. What's going through your mind at this time?
So what's going through my mind is that these were two doubles or two singles, maybe even, because the first business, we sold it too early. We created most of the value after the transaction was done, and we didn't realize the benefit of all that value we created. We could have sold it for a lot more. The second business, we were almost Facebook. I mean, we had a social newsfeed 2 years before then. If some different things had broken our way, we could have been that big a company. We had the right idea, the right product, the right time. So I felt like we had good successes, but we didn't have the grand slam home run that we were all hoping for. And so it really drove us to think about what's going to be next. And the third story is actually kind of similar because we launched a product called Glip. We thought that we had seen the transformation of personal communication through sites like Multiply with the newsfeed. And we thought that we could apply the same sort of principles to business communication and revolutionize the way that people communicated at work. So we launched Glip the same month as Slack with an almost identical product. And we worked really hard to bring that to market. And we saw Slack just growing like crazy. And although our growth numbers were also fantastic, they were nothing compared to Slack's, which were just like off the charts. So we ended up with a great exit with Glip. And in fact, it's now a product that's still being sold by RingCentral. And it has almost as many paying customers as Slack, which is something that's not like really widely reported. But it ended up being a great outcome, but not, you don't know my name, you know Stuart Butterfield's name, right? So for 3 businesses in a row now, I feel like we've gotten a solid double, and we've done well. But there's always been somebody out there that's had a really transformative win in the spaces that we've played in. And so I guess that brings us to our fourth company, where now we're building development tools with CodeStream. And I'm hoping that this fourth time is going to be the grand slam.
So is it fair to say that, you keep hitting these singles, it keeps hitting these doubles? Is it fair to say that this is adding to the appetite and the hunger looking for that grand slam? Because one could argue that this could be very mentally challenging. It's almost like you kind of keep getting second place, third place, second place, third place here. So is it fair to say that this keeps adding to that?
I think different people react to that differently. And for me, whenever I'm faced with a challenge like that, whether it's a big one, like, coming in second in a, multi-year struggle in the marketplace, or whether it's something shorter term, like if we have a particularly bad week from a metrics perspective and we try to figure out what's going wrong and how do we turn things around, it just comes naturally to me when faced with those types of challenges. It just forces me. It's not even, I don't think I want to do it. I just have to do it. Like I have to fix the problem. I have to solve the thing. I have to find success. And I often find myself, bleary-eyed at 4 o'clock in the morning, still working for the third night in a row, but I love it. It's just something, some part of me that's driven to try to find that success.
So before we get to Coldstream here, you've made your way. You've sold 3 companies, which is sensational. You sold 3 companies. What are the things that, if you can put it into small pivots here, what are some of the things that you do in the early days to make sure you're putting yourself in a position along the strive to make sure you're putting yourself in that position, and then getting close to the exit to make sure you're putting yourself in that position?
Early on, it's, I think, vision. You have to have the vision to enter the right market. And that means different things to different people. For us, it hasn't always meant doing tons of market research and talking to tons of customers and figuring out exactly what's missing in the marketplace, as some people will advise you to do. For us, it was more like jump off the cliff and figure out how to build the plane on the way down, but picking the right cliff. For all 4 of our businesses, we've had the good fortune, and I do recognize that a lot of it is luck, that we've picked industries that have taken off. And it's better to be in an industry where the rising tide lifts all boats than it is to try to push a boulder uphill when you don't have any tailwinds. So that's the first thing. Is in the beginning, you have to have the right vision. And then next is you've got to have passion, because there's something that Y Combinator calls the trough of despair, which is after the excitement of building out a product and launching it with great fanfare, and you tell all of your friends and family, and you tell everybody you know that there's this great new product, and you have growth like this, and then that doesn't last forever. And a lot of companies, in fact, I would argue almost every company, goes through this sort of period of time where you haven't quite found, the first version wasn't the one that found success. So you go into something called the trough of despair, and you've got to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. You've got to enjoy doing it, because you're not going to enjoy it because it's successful, at least not for a while. And different businesses for me have taken different periods of time in order to find that success. I remember with Multiply in particular, we had built something that we were sure it was going to change the world. I mean, the whole concept of a social news feed where you get to see all the updates from all your friends and family, every photo they share and every blog post that they make, every link that they share online. I mean, it was such an awesome concept. And yet a year into having that product available, our usage was minuscule, tiny. There are a whole number of reasons behind that. But there was a point in time where we had to, look ourselves in the mirror and have a come to Jesus meeting and say, are we doing the right thing by continuing to build this product? And that's where determination comes in. You have to put in the effort.
What's the total amount here? The amount of, all your companies being sold together. What's the total amount that companies were sold for?
The total amount of value we've created for, you mean in exits?
Yeah. So for each company altogether adding up.
I think it's somewhere a little bit south of $500 million.
Okay. So you've sold companies that are for a little bit south of $500 million. But you end up going through Y Combinator.
Yeah.
So one can make the argument that you kind of have to figure it out.
Yeah.
You kind of have to figure it out. And so why go through Y Combinator? Well, let the people know what Y Combinator is. Talked about it before earlier, but why go through Y Combinator and then let people know what is Coldstream?
So YC, as it's known, is a fantastic incubator that offers a 3-month program where if you apply and get accepted, they will give you money to attend the program in exchange for 7%. I think the latest deal is $150,000 they'll give to you as an investment in exchange for 7% equity in your company. Then you spend 3 months working from San Francisco and attending lectures and meetups that they organize, roughly 2 to 3, maybe 4 times a week during that 3-month time period. And all of this is leading up to something called Demo Day, where you will get on stage in front of an audience of 5,000 or so investors, and you will pitch your company in 2 minutes, which is a pretty crazy thing to think about, that you only have 2 minutes to talk to these investors. And you're right. A lot of people said, why would you join YC? Don't you know how to build a business? And so YC doesn't teach you how to build a business. I mean, you'll learn that too. But what YC teaches you is how to build a good business. And that's something that you can't really read in a lot of books, or I haven't found as good of a source of advice. And I learned so much. It was such an awesome, fantastic, wonderful experience. And the number of different things I learned and is one aspect that provided value. Their access to investors, having the YC badge of approval on your investment deck makes it so much easier to raise money. And also having access to the network. Now I'm among thousands of other founders, many of whom are successful companies, because YC invests in the top deals that they see. So from Airbnb to Stripe to Dropbox to Reddit, these are all YC companies. So many of the big internet brands that you know came from YC. And I can email any of those CEOs because now we're all in this sort of fraternity of YC graduates.
So talk about CodeStream, the transition there, and why CodeStream and what is CodeStream?
So as I mentioned in the beginning, my partners and I came through the computer science program of Carnegie Mellon. So we're really sort of at our core, we're a bunch of geeks, right? And I love to write code. I still write code every day. So my whole career, I've been writing code. And we've also, for the last 20 plus years, been building communication systems that help groups of people communicate more effectively. And we've seen how that changes the world. The one group of people that I think have been left out is software engineers. We're still stuck with kind of crappy basic tools when it comes to discussing code. And do you write code, Marlon? Yeah. Okay. So if you think about it, it's kind of crazy. We all know how Google Docs works, right? Where if you and I are collaborating on a document and I want to make a suggestion to you, I just select the sentence and type my comment, say, hey, change this, or maybe reword it like this. Well, software engineers don't really have that, because if I'm in my IDE or my editor and I'm looking at code, there's no facility for me to talk about it. So what most engineers turn to when they want to discuss code that they're looking at in their IDE is they copy and paste the code from their IDE into Slack, for example, or into an email or some other communication tool. Now, I'm not specifically talking about code review, because code review is something else, which is, we're looking at a set of changes and tools exist for that. But when it comes to just general code discussion, it's kind of crazy that engineers haven't built for themselves a discussion tool for code. So that's where CodeStream started, with that simple concept. And what we realized was that, unlike a Google Doc, where if I make a suggestion and you accept it, then really it's just the final document that matters. You don't really care about the conversation that led to it. Well, when you're talking about writing code, if you and I are discussing how a particular function works, like let's say I don't understand, I ask you a question and you explain it to me, well, that discussion might be as valuable as the code itself, because it explains how it works. So that was sort of the aha moment for us, was that build a code discussion tool that saves all the conversation with the code. And that was the first iteration, the first thing that we built with CodeStream. And when we demo it to people, their sort of eyes light up like, why hasn't anybody built that before?
So one could argue that why you just don't document your code? Document your code and stuff along the way instead of using CodeStream. What helps the difference between them?
Well, documentation is essentially, if you think about what you're asking an author to do. So I authored the code. Now you're asking me to document the code. Well, I just wrote the code and it's clear because I understand it, right? I wrote it as clearly as I am capable of. So in order for me to document it, I have to try to guess at what questions somebody else may have at some point in the future. And I think that's a fundamental dynamic of why people don't tend to document their code, because what are they going to write? The useless documentation that just describes exactly what you're looking at, that doesn't help anybody, right? So with CodeStream, we turn that inside out, and we allow not the author to document his code, but the user of the code to essentially document it by asking questions of the author. So rather than it being a push style documentation, you can extract the documentation from your teammates. And it's a much more natural way to get answers to exactly those questions that need to be asked. Like, why is this returning null? Why did you choose to use a function rather than a class here? These are things that there's no way the author would know to answer that question in advance. So it's sort of a different form of documentation. And it's interesting because once you realize that that capability exists, you wonder how you ever live without it. Like we use CodeStream, and like I'm using, of course, we use CodeStream to develop CodeStream. And I couldn't imagine developing without it. And that's what a lot of our customers say as well. It's kind of like, if you remember back to the time where we used to email Microsoft Word documents back and forth to each other, and like I'd make some edits and it's my turn with the document, then I'd email it to you and then you'd make some edits and you'd email it back to me. That's kind of what like software development feels like if you don't have CodeStream installed.
Okay. So here, last question. We're gonna jump into Q&A here. Drop your questions below for Peter. So you've had one tenure of success. You've started off at in Boston, Carnegie Mellon, Wall Street, to making your first exit, second exit, third exit, and now again as a new founder and CEO of CodeStream. Along this journey, and as you have to take steps, what are some things that you had to unlearn to continuously to get better and to get to where you are?
What did I have to unlearn? I guess I was shocked. I don't know if it's unlearning, but I was shocked at how, well, one way to put it is that I guess I had to almost unlearn everything that I learned in college because they teach you the wrong stuff. And what I'd like to say about my college education is it's not that Carnegie Mellon taught me what I needed to know once I entered the workforce, but they taught me how to learn. So they give you all these series of mental challenges about like, differential equations and, ring theory and stuff like that. And it's not so much that I'm ever going to apply that direct knowledge once I'm in the workforce. And I definitely didn't because I entered computer science rather than mathematics. But it's kind of like going to the gym where, are you ever going to have to deadlift 200 pounds? Probably not. But by lifting weights, it makes your whole body stronger. So whatever you do in life, it makes you better at it. So I also had the benefit of joining a fraternity when I was in college. And so what I like to say, and that was a fantastic experience for me. And I know it's different for different people, but I like to say that Carnegie Mellon taught me how to learn and Phi Cap taught me how to lead. And those are two really important qualities.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to dive in. We got a couple questions already in the chat. So Faisal asks, he says, what drove you while you worked those 3 years coding 100 plus hours a week with 3 hours of sleep a night before you sold your fantasy sports company? Was it vision, passion, determination, anything else, especially since you didn't know the real monetary value what you was working on at the time?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Well, I think part of it was kind of like just to prove the naysayers wrong, because I quit my job. It was a good job. And now I'd poured everything into this new project. And if we didn't succeed at it, I guess I would have had to admit that that was a mistake. And I didn't want to have to do that. But it also was fun. I mean, when I wasn't doing it alone. So every night when I'm, had my 10th cup of coffee for the day, and my eyes are getting heavy, I look over and there's Mike, or there's JJ, or there's Dave, and they're just as tired as I am. And we did it together. I can't thank them enough. They're more than brothers, more than partners. They've been a part of my life for so long. I don't even know what to call them anymore. But it's definitely been a team effort, and none of us could have done it without the others.
Awesome. My next question is from Steven. Steven says, what are some signals to look for in industries that indicate that it's up and coming?
Well, as I mentioned, I think it's important to pick something where there's a rising tide. And for me, there have been a few moments, not too many moments, but there are a few moments where I was struck by just how transformative a new set of technologies was going to be. One was the first time I saw the web. The second was the first time I saw the iPhone. That mobile was going to be something fantastically different than we had experienced before. And the third actually was when I heard about this little app that you could install on your iPhone called Siri. That was going to change the way that people interacted with computers now that they could listen to us in English. And I wouldn't have been able to predict that would have ultimately been a smart speaker industry rather than more of a mobile play. But that, those are the things that I think have been transformative. And so I think you need to look out for those really transformative product categories and then figure out how can you innovate within that category to offer something that's unique.
Awesome. So we have another question from Faisal. He says, for bootcamp grads, what are your thoughts about going into QA opposed to going to junior developer position? Was it challenging transitioning from QA to developer, and how did you make the transition?
Well, I think either would be great. And if you want to be a programmer, then the thing to do is program, which is what I did. I got a job as a QA engineer, and my job was to manually test things. And what I realized after that became somewhat repetitive, that I could build a test harness and have an automated system. And so I built that company's first ever automated testing. And that not only made my job easier, but it was, it benefited the whole company because then other people could run that test harness. So that's the type of thing that, software engineers have a unique capability that we can build whatever we imagine. And so if what you want to do is be a programmer, then get a job doing whatever. And especially for a QA engineer, presumably that would be for a software company. You can find ways to program at your job.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to wrap it up with one last question. It says, from your experience with Multiply, what advice would you have for building and buying a selling e-commerce platform?
I would say for that sort of category of application, which has been around now for 20 plus years, you need to find something that's very unique. And that may be a particular vertical category that's underserved, like, I don't know, trading flashlights or something. I'm just making that up. I don't know. There's probably is a great website for that already. Or a unique way to make the transaction simpler or different or in some way. And I would suggest that for any one of those ideas, do a little bit of research to see whether other people had tried it before. And that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do it, but understanding why they didn't succeed, or whether they did. Maybe they did and you haven't heard of them. But it's worth spending the time to do that to get a better understanding of the market opportunities.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Peter, man, this has been a jewel, a gift for sure. From everything you've experienced over the last 25 years, your knowledge, your hurdles, and I will definitely, I can speak for us, the listeners and stuff, and future listeners definitely get to appreciate you being here. Appreciate your time, appreciate your journey. We're all going to tune in and see where our code stream is going, and we'll also be the ones cheering and retweeting when it sells for $1 billion.
well, if I could shamelessly plug, like, before you wait until that happens, I would appreciate a retweet to help us get there. If anybody wants to check out CodeStream, where our Twitter handle is @TeamCodeStream. You can tweet at us there or just check out the product. And if you love it, we'd appreciate sharing the love. We're trying to build awareness, and that would be great.
Cool. I'm gonna put up I'm gonna put up Peter's card here, speaker card here, so you guys can follow up with him, follow him on social media, and yeah, and then networking starts in 5 minutes. So we're gonna take a brief break here. And Peter, again, my friend, definitely appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
All
Great
right.
experience. Great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, man. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
All right, friends, family members, developers, engineers, front end, back end, bootcamp grads, college students, all of the above. We are coming near the end here. You know, the whole goal of this conference here was to help give people some ideas, encouragement, insight onto the next steps of their journey, what they want to do. Hopefully, we reach that goal of helping you transition and look forward to what are next steps, especially as the place of stagnant that we are in right now. So kind of want to iterate what Brian said earlier. Hopefully this gives you ammunition to really just to burst out of this place and stuff we're in when it comes to an end. I know I'm ready. Stuff. I know I'm ready. I know I'm excited. And stuff. And so a lot of you have been asking about replays. There will be replays, multiple places actually. I'm going to figure out a way how to put it on YouTube. I'll probably throw up a quick website or something for Next Steps conference. And then in the next day or two, I would definitely appreciate. I'm gonna see you guys a survey to see what are your thoughts about the conference. And then if we complete that survey, you'll get first access to the replays too as well, and stuff. And so, it was definitely rewarding. And we'll look to see what are the next steps here for us. So I'm gonna put up Peter's card here in a second. Networking is going to start in 3 minutes. So if this is your day one of joining the session, the networking is to your left of your screen. So you see reception, you see stage right now is live sessions, and then networking is going to go live in a second. So you tap on that, tap the button, you're ready, and then you get paired with somebody random. I'm going to jump in there too in a few seconds too as well. And yeah, I definitely appreciate everybody being here, all the speakers, all the listeners, all the attendees. And we will catch you guys soon. I'll send out emails and I'll replay stuff all coming up. And just really appreciate everyone. All right, and we are out. Networking starts in 2 minutes.